Mike and I had been hoping we were going to be able to do in-person meetings in each of our communities, and we decided with the Delta variant that we're going to hold off on the in-person meetings. So Zoom is what we've got, and I appreciate some of you showing up to give us feedback and hear our updates. So I'll go first. My name is Michelle. I think everybody on the call knows who I am. I live in Westminster. I'm a first-term state representative, and there's a few things I've been working on recently. Supposedly we're not in session. Our session goes from January to May, but I think both Mike and myself have been very busy with lots and lots of things that are directly related to the legislature, even though we're not officially in session. So I'll just give you a brief update on what those have looked like for me, and then Mike will go ahead and do his update, and then we'll open the floor to any questions or comments you have.
Oh, wait,
so
I'm going to Michelle.
Yep.
Will you introduce the young woman who's working with you?
Oh, certainly. And before I give you my update, actually, Savannah, why don't you introduce yourself? I have my third intern from UVM working with me, and I'll let Savannah introduce herself.
So my name is Savannah. I'm a junior from UVM, and I am from New Jersey. And I'm a psych major and a minor in political science.
Thank you. And Savannah just began working with me maybe 3 weeks ago. So this is our first community meeting, but she's been helping me with some research, with some preparation for bill submission and all kinds of different things. So I'm very appreciative for her help. So in terms of my updates, a few different categories. There are several different subject areas that I would say have taken a lot of my time this summer, both in terms of things I've been researching and learning about to know what to do with them in the legislature, and also because they impact me personally. And I guess I would say the first one of those is COVID-19. Obviously, all of us have been impacted by COVID-19 in terms of the way it's impacted our world, our state, and the way we live. And in my particular case, I actually caught breakthrough COVID on the earlier end of the spectrum. I caught COVID the beginning of August. I was diagnosed with COVID-19 after I had a visit from my son who lives in Miami, who hadn't visited in nearly 2 years because of COVID. He was fully immunized. He came to visit me. He didn't know that he had been exposed. He almost certainly caught COVID on the plane on the way up because he works from home and had not been around very much. And he got a very minor cold about 4 days after he arrived. And then my husband got a sore throat about 4 days after that. They both got tested, and I was positive a few days later. So I spent an awful lot of time learning about COVID and breakthrough COVID and what was happening in terms of our state policies, which last year were actually among the most effective in the country. Our governor, I will absolutely give him credit for last year having a very proactive policy, which encouraged people to get vaccinated when they could, which provided limitations and guidance around public gatherings, around policy for people to travel or not travel, sharing households, many, many different layers. And all of those restrictions last year were really, really effective at preventing the spread of COVID. And we, many, many times, if you looked at a map of the United States, it would be yellow and red with levels of risk, and Vermont was green. But if you look at a map right now, we're right in there in the thick with all the other states. The policies that were very proactive and encouraging people to be more cautious, the governor has really pushed behind him, and I believe he's not doing enough. And I've said that publicly, I've said that privately, I've called his office many times. I fully support our speaker, Jill, and the pro tem from the Senate. They both have also called on our governor to have more proactive COVID policies, and he really has been very resistant to do so. So I'm happy to talk more about that, but I'm particularly concerned with how that carries over in schools. I had a conversation with a teacher right before school started. I was actually at the Putney Pool with my granddaughter and a teacher who's a constituent, and she was talking about being concerned about going back to school, and she's an elementary teacher. And I said, oh yeah, that must be nerve-wracking for you going back to elementary school where you're with all those children who can't be immunized. And she said, yeah, actually, that's not my primary concern. My primary concern is being with teachers who aren't immunized. And I said, do you know there are teachers that aren't immunized in your school? And she said, absolutely. And from my perspective, our state having a school that is putting unimmunized teachers into classrooms full of children, or unimmunized workers in a residential care facility for the elderly, that is not protective and responsible policy. So I do think we need to be doing more in that area. We're not in session, so all I can do is research and talk and send my messages to the governor, who's still working every day. But it's definitely something that's at the forefront of my mind. And I mean, last week we had the highest rate of COVID in our state that we've ever had in a single day, last week. So while the majority of the cases are people, the majority of the most severe cases particularly are people who haven't been vaccinated, I think at this point, 70% of people that are hospitalized are people who are unvaccinated in Vermont. But that means 30% of people who are hospitalized are people who were vaccinated. And those are people largely who are elderly or who have pre-existing conditions that make them vulnerable, and their immune system is not working as effectively. So if they get a breakthrough case, instead of having very, very minor symptoms, which was my experience, some of them are dying. So I do think that that is still very much at the forefront of my mind, and I expect it will be at the forefront of what we need to be paying attention to in January as well. So COVID, that's my first issue that I wanted to check in about. A couple others that I'll touch on briefly, and I expect we'll have some more discussion about this when we get to the Q&A. Recently, I've been spending a fair amount of time trying to understand the pupil weighting study and the task force that is making guidelines around the pupil weighting study. Basically, this has to do with the way we fund education, whether or not or to what degree we factor in issues like poverty, how many English language learners we have in the community, and a whole variety of other factors. So basically, Vermont has been operating under a certain system. There was a very large study which made some recommendations, and now there's a task force which is making recommendations about how to translate those recommendations into policy, which will impact our local communities, our local schools, and also will have an impact on what the local tax rate is to support the schools. So it's a very complex issue. I've been spending a lot of time trying to understand it, meeting with many, many different people that are far more knowledgeable than I am. I'm still learning about that, but it's a big issue, and it's definitely one we're going to be paying a lot of attention to in the spring. A third one I wanted to mention, which is a very local issue, and I'm not sure if anybody on this call has been one of the people that has contacted me or not, but the single issue that I have had more contacts about regarding than any other topic in the last, I would say, month to 6 weeks, is actually the issue of trapping. There are a lot of people, particularly people in Westminster, who are naturalists, hobby naturalists, who enjoy bird watching and looking at wildlife at the marsh down near Allen Brothers. And in the last few years, there's been some trapping there, and a lot of mammals have been killed with one of the landowner's permissions. And so I've had people concerned, what can we do to protect wildlife? It's a little tricky because it's a private property situation, and in Vermont, you are allowed to trap on private property. So nothing has been done there, as far as I know, that is illegal, but we're still looking into it. So I've been talking to a number of different people, including people in the different positions within state government who are working in natural resources. I spoke with a legislator who has proposed a couple of bills that would actually impact this. One of them is H-172, which actually directly addresses trapping policy as well as some hunting policy in Vermont. Another is H-411, which deals with wanton killing of wildlife. Both of those are bills that Jim Micolo, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, from up north. He's the vice chair of the Natural Resources Committee, and those are both bills that he's proposed. So I've been doing a lot of research into those two as well. I'm not sure that anything will be coming directly from me out of those areas. Those bills are already proposed, they'll be debated, but they are areas where I've been spending a lot of time paying attention, trying to understand, trying to get a sense of what could we do that would benefit the health of the marsh and the health of all who live in the marsh and the people who want to observe there. The one other thing that I wanted to touch on is just that I do have two bills that I have proposed to the legislature at this point. One of them was proposed in the last session. It was H-296, and it has to do with cash bail reform. So that's a criminal justice bill, and it has gone to the Judiciary Committee. I began presenting testimony on that in the spring, and there will be more, hopefully, more testimony and more examination of that in our next session. The second bill that I have put into the legislature actually was submitted the day before yesterday, and that's a bill that deals with racial justice and education. And it's a bill that was largely generated by a group of students that I worked with in the Governor's Institute this last summer, who were very passionate about racial justice and anti-racism being examined and addressed thoroughly in the Vermont education system. Sorry, my dog is barking. The students worked very closely on this project all summer long. I met with them a number of times as well. And Coach Christie, who is the sponsor, one of the co-leaders of the Social Equity Caucus, is one of the co-lead sponsors of the bill with me, as is another representative named Elizabeth Burrows, who lives up in Hartford area. So we just put that into the Legislative Council, for initial drafting this week. And I do expect it will be going forward, and we'll be looking at that hopefully in the spring, looking at a variety of facets of how we can better help Vermonters to have a comprehensive education regarding racial history and racial justice. Those are the primary updates I wanted to include. And just one other issue I'll touch on before I hand it over to Mike is just sort of my personal learning as a new legislator. I have had the opportunity this summer. The Social Equity Caucus meetings have continued, and I've been going to those most weeks, which has been really valuable. We've had a number of different speakers come in to address different topics, which is really helpful in learning about what's going on in the state regarding particularly racial justice issues and also issues related to other marginalized populations. But also I've had a chance to go to a conference. I went in, about 2 weeks ago, I went to the a conference that was focused on health and technology in Washington, D.C., which was sponsored by the CSG, which I think is it Council of State Governments, Mike? I think. So that was a conference where I had the opportunity to meet with legislators from all over the U.S. and hear from them about different policies that they've been working on. And that was really valuable and really interesting for me. And I am actually planning on going to one more conference before the legislature starts up again, which will actually be next week. I'm going to Tampa to the NCSL conference, which is, I believe, the National Council of State Legislators. And I'll be there for 4 days meeting with legislators about many, many different topics. Honestly, if I had not had COVID back in August, which gave me a supercharged high COVID immunity right now, I wouldn't go to Florida because they have among the worst COVID rates in the world. But I was assured by the Department of Health that I have 90 days hyperimmunity where it's almost impossible for me to catch COVID. So I was like, yay, I can go to the national conference. So that's my plan. I'm going to Florida, leaving on November 1st, and I'm hoping to meet a lot of legislators working on interesting policies that I might be able to bring back and help out in Vermont with. So that is my update, and I am happy to take questions, but why don't we go ahead and let Mike share his piece, and then we can open the floor to whatever issues people might like more information about. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Michelle. And thanks to everybody for coming out on a Saturday morning where we have some pretty nice fall weather that's been blessing us. And it's a welcome respite, I feel. As Michelle noted, COVID is still rearing its awful head. And even beyond people getting sick, how I think it's manifesting is we're just tired of dealing with it. People are, I think, tired, they're impatient. We're seeing incidents at school where the kids are struggling because they've been away from each other. Now they have to be social. And I think they're just reflecting the greater society that's struggling right now. And I think anything we can do to keep the temperature down will be helpful, because until we get COVID, it's going to limit anything else until we can get COVID under control. It's going to limit anything else we can do. And we've got a lot of work ahead of us. We have 2-year terms in the state legislature, bienniums that start in 1 year, finish in the next. We talk about how we take 2 years of work, 1 year of work, and cram it into 2. But we have a part-time legislature here, and that's one of the challenges of trying to get a lot done in a small amount of time. So we're in session January to May, 18 weeks that we try and get a year's worth of work done. So that's one of the challenges here. And as Michelle said, we've got a lot on our agenda, from the ground level, keeping COVID in check, looking at how it's affecting our educational system, how it's affecting our economy. And we've got bigger issues: climate, keeping the environment clean, racial and social justice. And then most especially, I want to mention the House is going to be voting on putting women's reproductive freedom on the ballot in November to change our Constitution. Now, you've probably seen states like Texas, Mississippi, Alabama are trying to totally take this off the board. They're trying to do away with 50 years of established law. And in some cases, people are calling this the war on women continues. What I'm hoping we can do in Vermont is lead the way and show the rest of the country that we respect women's right to choose, whatever that choice is. And that's why we're going to put it in the Constitution. So the House is going to vote on it. The Senate voted on it last session. And then it goes to the voters. Now, what we expect is there's going to be a lot of outside money coming into Vermont to put advertisements out there to try and stop people from voting for this. Now, years ago, the Equal Rights Amendment was actually voted down in Vermont because of that same dynamic, where people from outside Vermont convinced people this was not a good thing. So let's work to let Vermont be a leader and show that we respect women's right to choose. So that's going to be one of our big headlines here. Now, I work on the House Government Operations Committee, and we've got some pretty big headlines that we're working on. We're going to keep working on. And one of them is every 10 years, the country takes a census, and then we have to reapportion all our districts based on population. Now, the 3 towns that Michelle and I represent, Putney, Dummerston, Westminster, have all lost population. Almost all the towns, or a majority of the towns in Windham County, have lost population. There's only a few that have gained. So I don't think there's going to be big changes, but there might be some changes, and so stay tuned for that. There's another big consideration that Government Operations Committee is working on, and that's the state pension plan. It's clear that there needs to be some reforms. It's another one of those multi-layered topics that we've been doing a lot of work on to try and get to the root of, and it affects a more and bigger significant part of our state budget, though, how much we're having to put into that. So it's something we have to pay attention to. Along with that, between House Judiciary Committee and House Government Operations, we're going to continue to look at police reform. And one of the members of our House Government Operations Committee, Representative Hal Colston from Winooski, has put forth a bill to create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Vermont. This is based going back to what happened in South Africa when Nelson Mandela was elected to power there. And there was a process where they went around the country, let people hear the stories of what it was like and help understand so we can move forward and heal the wrongs of the past. Now, that brings up the idea that we're fighting against too, that there are people from outside the state trying to come into Vermont and tell us what we're supposed to teach our children about U.S. history. Basically, what they would like to do is limit or censor what gets taught in U.S. history. And our feeling is we need to learn from the past. We need to learn uncensored history and not limit it to tell these fairy tales about how good we were to the Indians and how slavery wasn't as bad as some people try to make it out to be. That's nonsense. And I feel we have students who are ready to hear the truth. We don't need to censor. And if we start that, that's a slippery slope to go down. And I don't think it's far from book burning and other ways of censoring information. So I will stop there for now. And we're going to open the floor to questions, and certainly ready to take anything. And this is the opportunity as we get ready for the next session for you to offer your comments, your suggestions for what we could or should be doing.
Mike and Michelle, I'll make one quick comment if I can, and that's really to, first of all, thank you both. Those are really excellent and clear reports. Michelle, I want to echo what you were saying about COVID-19 and our response to it, and thank you for continuing to urge the governor to be much more explicit in his emphasis than he is now on the need for people to be proactive in that area. As you know, as a school board member, I'm watching firsthand the kind of rock and roll impact on kids, on teachers, on the paraprofessionals, on everybody else, where the cases recur way too frequently. And kids are, I mean, my granddaughter was sent home at the front door as a kindergartner with a Chromebook unexpectedly the other day. Her brother sailed into the building and she was sent home. I think it was about the second or third week of school. So we really need to do more to emphasize the importance of getting vaccinated, but also the importance of the regular testing. That's available to people. And we're trying to figure out as a school board now, what percentage of educators are doing the weekly testing and what percentage of the children are. So we have more data there to work with. But there's really been insufficient guidance. I won't dominate the meeting, but I want to really reinforce what you both.
That's a great point, Cheryl. And I know that in Brattleboro, there's an outdoor testing site near the hospital where all you have to do is go to the website, or you can call the hospital, the Department of Health. I'm not sure in the Bellows Falls area where the testing is. Do you know, Cheryl or Michelle?
People have had to go to Brattleboro for testing, okay. But I think what Cheryl's talking about is, I mean, as I understand it, the state told us that testing would be available at schools, more readily available, that people would come and do testing, and I don't think that has begun. And I think that my understanding is that the direction you were looking at, Cheryl, or were you just more in general concerned about testing?
Well, there are two things. We actually already have surveillance testing on a weekly basis at the schools in the Windham Northeast Supervisory Union. So every Thursday, everyone who signed up for it does get a test. And so we find out, like I got a call this morning, Saturday, results of the Thursday test, that there are 2 more cases at the school, not resulting in any quarantine next week. So that's good news. So yes, we have weekly testing already available at the building as people drive by. In addition to that, there is the stay in school, or whatever it's called. That's not yet been implemented. There are a lot of logistical challenges around that. I did cert that the nurses are working so hard. I mean, it's like 24/7 every week. So we are, but what's missing there is the continued emphasis on the importance of being responsible, not only getting vaccinated, but getting tested, because if you're oblivious to it or think it doesn't matter anymore, and you end up, your children entering the school and they've been exposed and haven't been tested, you're spreading it. And so I'm finding from the community members, we're feeling like the state is really lacking in explicit guidance here. And today's Digger, there's an article about lessening the contact tracing. I'm actually not disagreeing with that. I think it's okay based on how it was described. But what isn't okay is diminishing emphasis on the importance of this as a shared responsibility. As Mike said a little while ago, it's affecting children's education, it's affecting the economy, it's affecting people's mental health. But I can't emphasize this is a worse year for the teachers than last year was. And it's because of the unpredictability and the spread of the variant. I'll stop. I see Spoon's hand is up, but thank you. Thank you for that. I really am, we're seeing it every day.
Thank you, Cheryl. Your points are well taken. So, Spoon, thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I got a few points. You began by talking about doing a year's worth of work in 18 weeks. Well, I do recognize that you do more than 18 weeks. You could probably do if you condensed it to a couple of more months outside of the legislative term, and I appreciate that. But the fact of it is, in the legislature, you do 18 weeks worth of work in 18 weeks. You don't do a year's work. I wish, it's kind of surprised me, and I'm a little disappointed that the legislature hasn't proposed to extend its legislative time more than it is, because so much work that needs to be done is not getting done. And I think I feel that a lot more money needs to go into the legislative process. I think you need aides, you need researchers, you need more time up there, and you need some higher pay. So if you have any people up there that are interested in that, I certainly would like to see that happen. I would like to hear, I wouldn't blame if there's a feeling. I served on a school board here for a couple of years, and I can't blame any lack of education that on the feds. It became painfully clear that it is our own state education leadership that I feel is inadequate, perhaps because it's a political job. It's an appointment by the governor, and I won't go into it. It's a long story, but I feel that education is inadequate, that our kids here are not really nearly as prepared as they should be to face the world that they will be. And that's our own problem. We have to own that. And the last thing is, if you would elaborate, Mike, a little bit more about the pension issue that you're involved in. What exactly are the issues? You make it sound like the issue is whether the state should put less into it than it is. Is that the whole thing?
Not at all. That's not at all the gist of what I was saying. The problem we have right now is there are unfunded liabilities. There's money that needs to get put into it. And as we're trying to suss this out, the roots of this go back to the 1990s, actually, when Howard Dean was governor, and the legislature decided at that time that they foresaw greater payback from investments than they in fact realized. And so what they did was they cut back on contributions at that time. And that started creating a hole in the pension fund, a deficit. As we got into around 2007, we put together a plan to address that. And we've been actually putting significant amounts of money into the budget to backfill those funds to make up for it. And then the recession hit. So that diminished how much we could put in. We're at a place right now where I think last year, the last budget year, we put over $400 million from the budget, a significant amount of money even in a $6 billion budget. And the problem right now is for the last 10 years, there have been significant shortfalls in investment returns. And so what we're doing is looking at how that decision-making process happens, and we're trying to amend that. And the other piece of it is that there are 3 different funds. One of them is, I believe, the municipal employees. Another one is with the state police and others, and then there's the teachers fund. The teachers fund has the greatest liability right now, and we're looking at contributions from all sides on that and how we make investments. So the commission that's been looking at that has been meeting every week through the summer, and they're going to continue meeting every week. And our hope is that they can put together a plan that respects the intentions of the legislature in regards to teachers, and also respects the ability of taxpayers to pay. So we're this is heading into November, where they've got another 2 months worth of work. So we'll have to see how they get to that. But I don't pretend this is an easy fix, but it's something we have to do, because if you look at states like Illinois right now, I believe 30% of their entire state budget is going towards unfulfilled pension liabilities. What that does, it stops so many other services from happening. So we don't want to get to that point. And I appreciate that our speaker, Jill Krowinski, and President of the Senate, Senator Ballant, have taken on this and made it a priority in saying, for the long-term health of Vermont and those pensions, we have to deal with this now. So I appreciate that they've taken on that hard work, made it a priority, and I think we're going to get to a good solution. So we have, I'm noticing we have Emily Miller on here, and we don't see her, but I'm just wanting to recognize her and let her know if she has a question or a suggestion for us. This is your time, Emily, so welcome.
Or even,
Yeah.
sorry.
I was just trying to find the unmute button. Yeah, I just want to say thank you. I'm a wife of a teacher who recently had a breakout case in a school where he works. And so I just wanted to say thank you to Michelle for your comments earlier. That's my biggest concern right now, is kind of the lax, what feels like the more lax school policy right now compared to last year. Yeah, no other thoughts on that, but thank you.
Well, I just want to say we appreciate everyone that's working in the schools right now, and our leadership has been pushing hard against the governor. We don't understand why he's changed from where he was last year. So what we're suggesting is everybody continue to contact the governor and let him know we need to go back to those safe protocols that were keeping us in good shape last year. So thanks for your feedback there, Emily.
I just wonder sometimes if the governor is running for a position that's not open yet, and he wants to have broader conservative support. But that's just Eva wondering.
You could be right about that.
Yeah.
I think that's an unfortunate thing if it were true, because the reality is right now, it's Democrats that elect Phil Scott. When you look at who voted for him, there's as many Democrats as Republicans voting for Phil Scott. And that may change if he doesn't change.
And sometimes that's the mistake when people say, well, I'm an independent. And it's like, I'm not wearing a seatbelt.
If I can keep the conversation moving along, I'd like to address housing in this,
Whoa,
which is becoming one of perhaps the most serious immediate problem that we have. And I have a feeling it's going to get a lot worse. And I haven't yet seen a good analysis of what's going on. I mean, I can see on the surface, the symptoms, the issues is a two-bedroom apartment that's renting for $1,500 or $1,600 a month. And so essentially, there is not nearly enough affordable housing in this state. I expect it's going to get a lot worse when people from all over the coasts and other places begin choosing to buy houses here because they feel insecure where they are. And that's a pretty obvious problem coming down the pike. What is the state doing now? Either one of you.
Well, I can address a little bit of that, and maybe Mike wants to add to it. But a couple of things. I agree with you. Housing is a huge issue for us right now. One of the biggest one in the state. There is a very dire lack of affordable housing, and actually a very dire lack of housing, period. I'm trying to find an apartment to move to Montpelier for half of the year in January, and I can't find an apartment that's available. So I mean, I think on every level, there's a shortage of housing right now, and that's for a variety of factors. But I will say, in terms of the issue of what is the state doing, I serve on the Corrections and Institutions Committee, and last year we put into the budget, and the House and the Senate approved, and the governor signed it, an extraordinary amount of money to go in. I believe it was like $150 or $180 million to go to the Vermont Housing Conservation Board to develop affordable housing in a number of different regions of Vermont. So again, that's not a quick fix. Like, we gave them the money, it was approved in the spring. You're not going to have places that people can live probably out of that for at least 2 years. But is there more housing being developed? Are there existing houses that are being renovated that will be available on the market? Yes, there are, but again, not a quick fix. A second issue that I just wanted to address before I give Mike a chance if he'd like to add is just that there are some, I mean, you mentioned about people coming in from the state, from out of state and from other regions. And one of the areas that I'm actually quite actively involved in is looking at refugee resettlement. And in that particular population, there actually are some different factors at play. I'm on a local committee which is exploring hosting refugees in the northern part of Windham County, which could happen before the end of the calendar year. And I was in a meeting recently where I found out that of the new arrivals that are coming into Brattleboro, and they're expecting to have at least 25 coming into Brattleboro in the next couple of months. There's going to be an arrangement where they are going to be able to stay at SIT in renovated dorms. So SIT is not opening themselves up as a public housing market for everybody in the state, but they are willing to house for the initial period of their stay these refugees while they come and get oriented, begin to get ready to life as Vermonters, and then we'll be moving on to other regions. So there are some new places that are coming on board very quickly, which will be meeting the immediate needs of the international arrivals who are coming, which, as I said, that could be happening very quickly, and there will not be new housing developed by then other than these short-term facilities, which are going to be available. And I'm really grateful that SIT, that's actually my alma mater, I'm very grateful that SIT is stepping up and providing this housing as a way to give safe places for people to live who literally have fled from their lives from Afghanistan in the last 6 months.
I think
Mike, did you want to? Oh, sorry.
I think the number of refugees that are expecting is so minuscule that it need not be a part of this conversation.
You know what? Mike, before you speak, I need to jump in. What, Michelle? Airbnb is taking up the apartment that you might get in Montpelier. Just to know that. Airbnb needs to be regulated it was two guys in California that need to pay their rent. And what do? They put up, blow up mattresses, and they're out of that, you know, places like all over the world. Barcelona can't find, they can't find workers because there's no place to live. We've got a serious problem with Airbnb, and it's not being addressed. I don't know how it can be addressed, but it's taken away housing from people that work at the general store here in Putney, at the co-op, and so on and so forth. That's one thing. Yes, people coming from out of state with money, buying up places, and also people investing and not living in those places. And what's the chap's name? You all know him. He lives in Guilford, and he gave his fortune away. And if you read the Commons, he talks about that, how people are investing in, you know, let's see, what is it? New Hampshire, South Dakota. He names the states where people are, what is it? Laundering, what is it? Laundering their money, house, shelters, financial shelters, you know, that are being done. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. The other thing, when I taught school in Alaska, folks, listen up. I lived with a number of people in an insulated trailer. There's nothing, I was never embarrassed about living in a trailer. If the place, there's a wonderful place in Keene, not so far from the hospital, fabulous place, it's been there forever, trailer park. What is wrong with doing something that is not as expensive as 400,000 or 300,000, but housing in that way? What is wrong with us that we're beautiful Vermont and we can't do that?
That's a
Sorry,
good
I'm
point,
finished.
Eva, and I want to start with the headline, everyone deserves housing. And from there, though, I want to remind people that the conversation this year is keeps growing. And there's lots of concerns, well placed, that we need to house the homeless. People need a home. And then there's a lot of working people that need affordable housing. And that's a huge piece of this as well. Where people that work at the co-op in Putney can't live in Putney. People who teach at Putney Central School can't find housing in Putney. The principal told me one of the teachers there, they just hired, found a house in Putney. There were 5 bidders on the house. Luckily, they were chosen. And one of the reasons was they were going to stay in the community. Before they signed the deal, though, one of the other bidders approached them and offered them $150,000 to walk away from the deal. This was on a $400,000 house. So this is the kind of money that's going in. And your point about Airbnbs, Eva, is something we need to look into, because we're finding it's not the people that are renting out their garage apartment or renting out an extra bedroom that are the problem. People are buying houses and turning them into Airbnbs. And that's something we have to regulate. Other states have done that. Now, we do have a structure in Vermont through the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, who does a lot of great work, both to conserve land, but to funnel the housing dollars to our local housing trusts. And we're really fortunate to have the Windham Windsor Housing Trust and Elizabeth Bridgewater here, who's heading up that trust. And we are trying to continue to put some affordable housing around the state. One of the challenges is when you have a large apartment complex or housing, you need the utilities there. And many of the small towns don't have that capacity right now. So that's one of the things we can do to help towns be ready for that. Now, Putney does. That's why we have several endeavors from the Housing Trust, and we're trying to put another one in there, just down, not far from Putney Co-op, put up 20 new housing units. We need housing like never before. We need it in Windham County. We need it across the state. So that's going to be a big conversation. The hope is it's going to be an even bigger conversation if the Congress can get off their hands and finally pass President Biden's infrastructure bill, because there's a lot of money in that. And the reality is that there's just a few people holding that up. And we need to be able to push through that, and hopefully that'll open the spigot so we can get money. We can get money for daycare, for childcare, for early educators. We can get more money for supports within our schools. And in Vermont, the other piece we have is a lot of our schools have infrastructure deficits that they've been running. We need to make sure our schools are in good shape. So that infrastructure bill is very important. As you know, our senators and representatives are fully supportive. If you know people in other states, though, contact them. That's one way that we can help to get that moving, because that's an important part of creating a better future for this country. Now,
The
we've got
next,
about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask their questions, and I'm guessing Spoon has another question.
So Mike, just 1 second before we go back to Spoon again. My husband Ron has actually been here listening to us, but he's off camera. But I guess he said he has something he wants to bring up, so I'll let him on camera too. Here, go ahead.
Housing was a thing I wanted to bring up, and I just wanted to amen to that conversation. And I think that I'm no legislator, I don't know the law, but it would seem to me, I'm with Eva on this B&B regulation, feels like a place, because I mean, I know people personally who are making a lot of money doing Airbnb, and it's an awkward thing to be like, oh, hi, yeah, oh, that would be such a nice apartment for a little family, but you're making $130 a night instead. So some sort of regulation of that seems appropriate for Vermont. And I know there are other pieces, but thank you for weighing in on that, everybody.
Well, is it no one besides me that understands that trailers and a trailer park is an okay thing?
Yeah, no, I say yes to that too.
Eva, as you know, I lived in it. We had a trailer in Putney the first 7 years we were here. Then we were able to build the house. So I have no problem with that. The problem is, just like with when you want to put housing up, you're going to have the naysayers that don't want anything like that. So that's one of the pieces we're trying to work with. And there's a movement that started in California. It's called the YIMBY. Yes, in my backyard. I think that's where we need to get going, because I'm going to be blunt here. Vermont is at the place where if we don't start making space for new people, whether they look like us or not, and younger people, Vermont is going to turn into one big shaker village, and we're going to wither away.
Yep.
We've got to make the space for more new people to come in here. And the other piece is we need to encourage more collaborations, public-private, such are happening right now in Brattleboro with Bob Johnson and with the Prouty Center there, Chloe Leary. That looks like a project that holds a lot of promise. There could be a significant number of housing units going up. So we need to make sure that we can encourage those kind of partnerships.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you.
Mike, you kind of led right into my next subject. As you mentioned, the need to try and attract a younger population here and to stay here, those that are here to stay. And that ties in nicely with the climate issues. It was a very strongly worded story by Anthony Paulina in the Reformer yesterday, I think, talking about the climate committee or whatever it is up there in the state, and a major proposal that sounds like it's in the pipeline and should appear. And if the state, it's not only essential that we respond to climate issues, but if we did and put resources into it, that would create the kind of work that would attract younger people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And both Michelle and I are part of the Legislative Climate Solutions Caucus. It's working in conjunction with the Climate Council that we put into law a couple of years ago. I'm going to be blunt again. The real challenge here is the governor, who says the right things, but when it comes time to put the money on the table, he backs off. We could be part of a 14-state collaborative right now, the Transportation Climate Initiative. There are 14 states in New England and Mid-Atlantic that are trying to create collaborative efforts to create transportation systems. As most people know, transportation is the biggest part of our carbon footprint in Vermont. We need to have less cars and less driving. So we're pushing, and what we're going to need help in is pushing the governor some more to actually walk the talk.
How about a van that went up and down 91 picking up legislators Monday morning?
Well, a lot of us carpool already. So Michelle, did you want to speak to the climate piece?
I don't have a whole lot to add right now. I would just say I put a piece in the chat. Mike and I ended up touring some parts of the state after the big storms this summer. And we wrote a piece that actually talks about the need for people to both exhibit personal responsibility and for us to move forward as a state and work on climate issues. It's obviously a huge, huge issue, and one that both Mike and I are happy to get on board with.
So we've only got a few minutes, and I'd just like to share something here before we go. We've got a lot of challenges in front of us, but listening to an article and picking up a book by Susan Simard, who's a forest ecologist out in British Columbia. And her book talks about the vast systems that our forests are, both above and above the ground, how they work together. And it's very similar to another book that's gotten a lot of readings over the last couple of years, The Overstory by Roger Powell. I think these books exemplify how nature works together, how nature, especially when we don't intrude too much, can heal. And I think similarly, we can heal as a country, heal the world, if we start working together, and especially working in concert more with the environment. So I'm going to pass it over to Michelle for her closing comments, but I also want to thank you all for coming, and please stay in touch.
Thank you, Mike, Michelle.
Okay, and I don't want to take up a whole lot more of your time. I would just say I like the idea of Mike closing with the book that he's been reading recently, and something that I just finished reading yesterday or the day before was a book by a woman named Valerie Kaur. Her last name is Kaur, called See No Stranger. And the subtitle is something like A Memoir of Revolutionary Love. And she's a Sikh woman, S-I-K-H, who has spent a lot of her career as a civil rights lawyer, who does a lot of activism around providing a more just society and working against hate crimes and things along those lines. And it was a profound book that had many, many examples of problems in society and in our world, and also examples of healing, where people who had hurt each other deeply had figured out how to understand each other afterwards. And I think that that's something that we don't see enough of in our world. I think we have a lot of damage in our world in the post 2016 federal administration that, you know, we're still picking up the pieces. And we're working with that right now in the Vermont legislature. We're trying to figure out how can we heal our country that in so many ways is still so divided and so broken. And I guess I just say on a personal level, on Monday, tomorrow, I'm actually starting one of 3 classes at the Vermont Law School towards a Vermont restorative justice certificate. And I'm really excited to be doing more reading and more learning about these kind of issues. How can we help the world to heal together? So I hope everybody has a chance to do some thinking and some exploring around all these complex topics. And please let us know. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here to represent the people of Vermont. And we don't have all the answers. And if you have some suggestions, we would love to hear from you. So thanks for showing up and keep following up with us.